are going to talk about line types. This is probably like one of the first things you will see in a geometry class, just to get you familiar with some of the lines that you'll be seeing throughout the units. So yeah, our first type that we want to look at here is called a segment, or you might also see it called a line segment. Both these mean the same thing, just interchangeable for each other. And now what you're going to see that these look like, you're going to have a dot on a line, you're going to have another dot, and then you're going to have them labeled. Now these can be labeled anything. You'll probably see A, B, C, D, just because those are the first ones that come to our head. Now, these represent endpoints, so the line goes from A to B. Now it might fall on a longer line like this. When you're talking about A to B, you're just talking about this area right here. So between A and B. And you will see it denoted, which just means called, as AB with a line above the head, or BA. In this case, same exact thing. It just depends what way you want to look at it. I mean, you could flip dimensions, and it's the same thing looking back and forth. It's basically like a mirror, you can imagine. And some of the properties you might want to keep in mind is if I had a ruler right now, I could put it up to my screen and you could measure from A to B. So this is measurable. You have two endpoints, A and B, and that's all we're talking about. We're not talking about this entire line, we're just talking about between the 2 points. Now let's look at another type you might come in contact with. That's rays. Now a ray is similar to a line segment. You're going to have a starting point. Let's call this A. And then we're going to have B. So very similar to a line segment, but you're going to see it denoted with an arrow at the end. And now you might not see this dot. The B might just be over the arrow, which is fine. But they might also do it just for simplicity purposes. But what this means is that we can measure the start point of A. We have the dot that it matches with, but it's going infinitely in the direction of B. So an arrow just means it continues that way. So if we're going to denote it, very similar to what we saw up here, we start at A, but then we go through B. Arrow points to the way that it's going to continue. And now you might be able to write it backwards, but you probably won't really see it that way. But you do, if they wanted you to write it backwards, you want to make sure the arrow is pointing in the way that the line continues going. Now the third type you might see is just called a line, which is a little confusing because we have line segment up here. But a line is basically a ray. And now imagine all these lines are straight. I can't draw straight, but imagine they are. So a line is simply a ray in both directions. So we know that the arrow means that the line is going to continue in a direction. So for this, it means that the line continues in both directions. So we can write our endpoints. We have C and D in this case. We make sure the arrow goes in both directions, signifying that for either way, it's going to continue moving in that direction. So you can write this backwards. You can write it as DC. Again, you might be able to write this backwards for the ray, but you probably won't see that as often. Just refer to what your teacher kind of wants you to do in that situation. But yeah, so these are the three types you'll probably see most in geometry, and if you're taking a line unit right now, this is what you'll see. You have the segment, line segment, rays, and line. Now for the segment, measurable in both directions between the points. Ray, you have a starting point. It could be wherever, and it goes infinitely in one direction. And then the normal line, you have two endpoints that you might have represented. Again, you might not see the point. You might just have it above the arrows. Just kind of for simplicity purposes, I'm putting it there. But it goes infinitely in both directions, meaning it cannot be measured. So a segment or line segment can be measured. These other two cannot be measured. Now let's look at some examples for clarification. So let's look, I'm going to draw one, and then you can pause the video and you might want just to think about it. So yeah, let's see here. So again, I'm writing the dot for simplicity purposes. You might just see it above the arrow or below the arrow. Either that's fine. But what would we call this? So whenever naming one of these or denoting it, I think an important thing to realize is what kind of line are we dealing with here. Now we see an arrow going in one direction, so we know that it is a ray. Okay, and now we know we're going to have to denote it with the two letters that were provided. So let's write out D and F. And now for any of this, you always just make sure you have the arrows lined up. So we see there's not an arrow on the side of D, so we can just start up here. But then we see the arrow goes through F. And when it comes to noting, that's all you basically need to do. Your teacher might want you to also name it, which is understandable. But as long as you can just read the line and understand what's going on, you'll be able to denote it just fine. So let's look at another example. Let's say we have C here. It ends at D. So now these are two endpoints, no arrows involved in this, showing that it doesn't continue in any direction. So this is something that is measurable. Because we don't have two arrows or one arrow, we know that it doesn't go on for infinity, and that we can actually put a ruler up to it and see and measure the endpoints. So now let's see. Out of all the types, we had lines, rays, or line segments. Since this one's measurable, we call it a line segment. You might just see it referred to as a segment, which is fine as well. Oh, yeah, we don't do that quite. So let's see here. We got C and D involved in this situation. And now we know it's measurable. There's no arrows, so we just put the line above it. And since it's measurable, we can reverse it as well. And let's do one more example. Say you have this line. That's a D, this is an E. So we see arrows going in both directions. That's an important detail. We know that no matter which way you're going, it is going to go for infinity, not measurable. Great properties, understand. Now, what type of line is that though? We already dealt with line segments, which are measurable, rays, which go infinitely in one direction, and if you're looking up here, you can see it. We have a line here. Slightly confusing name, you just kind of have to get used to that. Math doesn't always make the most clarifying names for things, they actually make things very confusing. Then we use the letters involved in this situation. And we draw arrows in both directions, signifying that throughout D and throughout E, it goes to infinity. Again, you might not see this denoted with little dots here, but it might just be above the arrow. Totally fine. Definitely wouldn't worry about that. So yeah, I mean, these are the three line segments that you guys will be dealing with. It's just important to understand the properties, maybe rewatch the video. The main things you gotta worry about are if it can be measured or not, if it goes to infinity direction, what direction is it going in infinity in, that can help you with the denotion. Now I drew everything just parallel to the screen, but you can see lines in any direction. It can be like that, this, like that. You got 360 degrees that you can work with. So in that case, I mean, so you got this, D, let's call that F. This one, we go from F to D, infinity through D. So once you work on the basic ones that you'll see most often, it's not the most difficult thing to go back and understand which way that it's going. So yeah, I mean, beyond that, there's not much more to know about line segments. You might get with a little more complex naming ones, but that's about it for the most part. So thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, feel free to comment. Subscribe. I have a lot more videos that I plan on recording for you guys. And I want to just clarify math, make it a lot simpler, and show that it doesn't have to be so confusing. So, thank you for your time, and tune in for the next one.